Hello there, my inspirations. My name is InspirAsper, and welcome to my updated 2020 guide on how to make lo-fi music in Ableton Live. Now, a few months ago, I made a tutorial on how to make lo-fi music in Ableton Live, and I just felt like delivering a new and improved tutorial on how to make this genre of music. So in order to do so, I will go through this Ableton Live session that you see in front of you, which is actually a song off of my new lo-fi EP, out now on Spotify, iTunes, yada yada yada. Click the links in the description below. But that's enough housekeeping for now. Let's jump into learning how to make this lo-fi track, which sounds like this. Let's break this down layer by layer and see what comprises this lo-fi track. First things first, I set my Ableton Live BPM to 82, a little bit in the slower range. Now, in my opinion, one of the main foundations of a lo-fi track is the layer of percussion. Here's what all of my percussion sounds like just by itself. Cool. As you can see, I only have 4 layers. It's not overly complex, but it's not simple either. First, I have a layer of kicks right here. This is comprised of 3 different kick samples stacked on top of each other, playing at the same time, in this following pattern. These 2 samples right here deliver the main kick sound, whereas this third final sample gives just a little bit of that low-end punchiness. Not that that's needed necessarily for lo-fi, but hey, I mean, to each their own. As for audio effects, it's fairly minimal. A kick EQ, again, just to boost the low ends, reduce a little bit of the mid-range frequencies, and then bump up the high end just a little bit. This glue compressor is used just to tie all 3 of these samples together, make it sound more uniform, and then we call that a day. Nothing too crazy, just some good old kick samples playing like this. And of course, to complement our kicks, we have a layer of snares. This is also 3 snare samples stacked on top of each other. These 2 samples are more of a lo-fi-ish snare sound I got from a sample pack, and then this last one is more punchy. Similar audio effects to my kick layer, I just have an EQ specifically tailored to these snares, which I found in Ableton's library over here, and also a glue compressor. So all together, and that's my very simple layer of kicks and snares. Now, to liven up my percussion, I threw in 2 more crucial layers, one being cymbals and miscellaneous shaker snapping sound effects. So this one has a bit more going on, sure, this is arguably a bit more complex, but we can break this down. First, I have one layer here that's a bit of a wet snapping sound. So it looks like this is played on top of every other snare, and while it's subtle, it does add a little bit of variety. I have these shaker samples playing right here. Just playing at the end of every bar, these 3 right here. I feel like this ties in the end of each bar and also introduce a little bit more rhythm that the listener can follow along with. I also have this layer of tambourines. Just playing in between the kick and snare occasionally. And then lastly, another layer of shakers. I feel like this sample's main purpose is to fill in the gaps, and those subtle noises filling in the gaps are what makes the percussion sound a little bit more complex, since there's always something going on. So then again, my kicks, snares, and this miscellaneous folly-ish layer all together Lastly, I threw in a layer of hi-hats. Similar to the last layer, at first this looks like there's a lot going on, but the more you dive into it, it's fairly straightforward. For the most part, these hi-hats are just playing one after another, rarely overlapping. Obviously you can see some instances like this, and over here there are multiple samples playing at once. However, if I were to simply collapse these all into one row, it becomes a little bit less intimidating now that they're played in just this following pattern. So then all I did here was split these up into different samples. I now have that previous pattern playing different samples. And I found all these audio effects in various percussion sample packs. These are just random hi-hats that sound like this. So feel free to use whatever audio samples you want. So now all together, here's my layer of percussion again. Cool, so now that we have a nice layer of percussion that I'm vibing with and we can work with, let's move on to our actual melody of this lo-fi track and move into our layer of keys. Here's the main instrumental part of this track. Okay, so here there actually is a good bit going on, so let's spend a good chunk of time breaking this down. First, I'd like to call out this layer. This is my main chord progression, which looks like this. This stack of chords with my instruments and audio effects, which we'll get into in just a little bit, creates a detuned, maybe 80s synthwave type of vibe that I was looking for. So for now, let's remove these audio effects and just hear my sound as it is. This is a preset in Massive. If I remember correctly, I think I found this on Splice. But the point is, this is the VST that I'm using to drive the main force of this actual sound, the instrumental. And so the big takeaway here is, yes, that's a good sound that I like and I really feel, but also that this chord progression is very integral to our entire track. Most everything instrumental revolves around this chord progression. And since this is a lo-fi track, there's not too much crazy mixing and mastering going on. Most of the time spent making this little loop was on perfecting this chord progression and all the different layers that interact with it. So feel free to create something that you really like. I'm planning on making a video soon about chord progressions. I don't know if that'll help anyone, if that interests you. One thing I like to do when writing chord progressions is to draw out what scale I'm in to the left of my piano roll in Ableton over here. This is just as easy as writing in all the notes in my scale. Say for example, if I want a major scale, drawing all the white notes from C to C. I've made a video about this if you haven't seen it already, so I'll gloss over this. And then you just drag these notes over to whatever tonic you want, and boom, we have a G major scale. Point is then, once you have your notes of your scale drawn out, writing chords is just as easy as stacking notes that are in your scale on top of each other. I know there's a little bit more to it than that, but it's a good starting point. Anyways, draw out a chord progression that you're happy with, and then on this layer I added in a few crucial audio effects. One of them being an EQ. I'm cutting out the low ends. I'll fill this in with my layer of bass later. I do have an OTT and a Camel Crusher back to back, a very powerful combo to really liven up the sound by compressing it a good bit, a stereo finalizer to widen the mix in a more stereo surround sound, and lastly you'll see on this entire grouping I have some audio effects as well, most notably being some side chaining to my layers of kicks and snares. That way my percussion can shine through a little bit more. And also, very importantly, I came across this audio effect plugin from Baby Audio called Super VHS. If I were to summarize this in one sentence, it'd be pretty much the lo-fi plugin for dummies. I just dragged this on top of my entire group, tweaked with a few of these parameters, including this weird magic setting. Point being, in short, this really adds the lo-fi, detuned, wavy sound that I was looking for. Again, that weird 80s synthwave feel, maybe? Let's remove this and hear what my layer sounds like and then turn it back on to see the effect that it has. And on. I think this is a very important layer to this entire mix, and it really draws that sound that I was looking for. And going along with this, I have a few layers of keys and xylophones. This is playing the same notes as my chord progressions, just obviously a little bit offset to get that cascading waterfall sound. I liked this sound. It felt like someone was brushing their hand across a wind chime, maybe. And I did the same with this layer of keys. And lastly, the same exact thing on this layer of a Rhodes-like keyboard. But very wet. A lot of reverb on this. So altogether, these 4 layers sound like this. which in turn, with our layer of percussion, altogether sounds like this. Which is, 90% of the track already. That's exactly what I was going for. However, I did throw on one more layer on this group of keys, which sounds like this. This is a detuned, almost vocal sound, someone going, ah. Just playing at a constant rhythm, I think tied in at the same time as the snares, maybe? Boom. This, again, going back to what I mentioned before, fills in some of the gaps of the track by providing a constant rhythmic sound that's still in key with the rest of our layers. Due to providing a constant expected rhythm, I think this provides the comfort to the listener that lo-fi music should. Now, I've also gone ahead of bass. This is an instance of Serum that almost emulates a real instrumental bass, and the notes it's playing are mostly following along with our layer of chords. If I were to copy my chord progression over onto my layer of bass, lower this down by an octave, you'll see that a few of the notes that the layer of bass was playing get covered up, essentially meaning that, yeah, they're contained in my layer of chords. There's a few stragglers, but those are still in key, otherwise they'd stand out like a sore thumb. The main takeaway here is that, yes, this plays along with our layer of chords real nicely, but also throws a little bit of variety into the mix, which we've come to realize is a good thing. Audio effects just include a layer of EQ to emphasize the frequencies that I want and remove the ones I don't. Compression, some limiters, and then again, these two compressors over here in Ableton mean that I'm sidechaining to my layer of kicks and snares, so they also shine through. So now altogether I have a grouping of keys, which are mostly my chords and whatnot, my bass and percussion, which altogether sound like this. And that sounds nice, in my opinion. I really do like the feel of that. The bass is meant to be subtle, at least in this lo-fi track. We don't want it to be too overpowering. Otherwise, we're just gonna slam our listeners' ears with too much low frequencies, which doesn't make for a nice, relaxing track. Finally, in the mix, I only have one more grouping of random sound effects. And following with today's theme, these also mostly just fill in the frequencies, the gaps in our track. I have a layer of rain, which sounds a little bouncy and wobbly. That's because I have a kickstart audio effect on top of this layer, as well as some sidechaining to my kicks and snares like I've talked about before, but more in effect since this layer can afford to be sidechained more. I have a layer of vinyl static crackle, which is a staple of most lo-fi tracks, just providing that nostalgic imperfection. Some random sound effects over here include some falls and risers, which just ties in all the various sections of our song, providing more of a structure. So altogether, my layer of sound effects, which in turn, our entire track now sounds like this. And that'll do it for this video. That's just the basics of how you make a lo-fi track in Ableton Live. I appreciate you taking the time to watch this. If you want to listen to this full track and 3 others, you can go check out my EP, Embark, on Spotify, iTunes, all your streaming services of choice, under my new artist name, Inspur. But that'll do it for this video. Thank you so much, and as always, I will see you in the next one. Bye.